Would you want us to have the light on?
Yes. I know it's like now, but
So please, I'd like to announce again, if you are a panelist, please, your space is reserved here. If you are a panelist. If you have any, yes. If you have any presentation, you are expected to sit here. And then, if you have any material that you'd like to display, please bring it over so that we can include it. We have different instructions. I'm sorry, I'm not working by my own instructions. But then, if the solution to the problem is that the panelists are also presented, please move forward. I apologize for any I'd like to confirm the presence of the following people. Ademola Adeshola, Feishayo Akindoyin, Is a thing Wamba? Oluwatoyin Oluwaniyi. Mary Umoso. Okay. Biliamino Sarki Shehu and Aisha Osonwara.
Somebody put,
No, that's not
Yeah, sorry, please. Is there any panelists seated among us here? We know we have two already here. Anybody who's presenting on this panel? Okay, so we have two, and then we're going to have about two people online, right? Thank you.
So I think somebody was already online.
Yes.
Who's the panelist? So that was a day, you know, so that's just something.
Okay, I think we can start. We just have a minute. Can everybody hear me very well?
Yes.
Good. So we just have a minute to the official starting time. We can as well go on. Good afternoon and welcome to this panel, which has four sessions. So it's a panel on liminal beings, representation of children without childhood. Thank you. So my name is Ademola Adeshola. I'm a professor at University of Manitoba. Sorry, did I say University of Manitoba? No, that was where I did my PhD. So I teach at Montreal University in Canada. My teaching and research interests are post-colonial literatures, African and Black diaspora literatures, and children and conflict. Yeah. I am quite very excited by this panel, and I want to thank you for making it and for coming. We would have a total of 5 presenters. We're not sure everybody's going to come, but we have 2 here already guaranteed. We would have, to my understanding, 1 person who is already here already. Perhaps other 2 panelists will join us. So as you might have seen regarding this panel, the focus is on the sense in which writers, researchers, and all categories of thinkers think about children, conflicts, and particularly the category known as children without childhood. What does that even mean, for example? So this panel hopes to unpack for us, these important points. And at the heart of the panel are certain critical questions. For example, we're interested in what is a child? How do you even define that human category, in that sense? And again, what are the stable and the unstable contexts of the concept of childhood. And what does it even mean to be a child without childhood? In that sense. In which countries of the world, or if you excuse the lazy use of this phrase, are these children to be found in the global north or the global south? So where do children without childhoods domicile? I mean, it's going to be an important thing to find out. Analytically, are children without childhood graspable? Can we unpack them? Can we, of course, make sense of who they are? And we're also interested in the liminality of this category. In other words, these children who are not children and who don't progress to adulthood. So where do they fall? So, to what degree are they liminal beings in that sense? And the liminal space they occupy, to what degree does it allow them, to be subversive? To what degree does it allow them to collapse boundaries of childhood and adulthood? So these are some of the questions that would agitate our minds and that hopefully our presenters across the 4 sessions are going to be wrestling with in that sense. So just a very quick housekeeping here. Each presenter would have 15 minutes, to do their thing, at the end of which we would open up to the audience. We would welcome questions. We would welcome comments. We would invite you to make suggestions. And these are important because at the end of this conference, the entire 19 papers that will be presented across the 4 sessions would become an edited volume. So we are hoping to produce an edited volume from this panel. So again, I also want to send out an invitation. If you don't present on this panel, but you are interested in the focus of the panel, I can send you the detail and you can consider whether you want to send something in. So on that note, I will be inviting the panelists to go. I am not going to give any biographical information about the panelists. So each panelist would come here and they're going to introduce themselves. They're going to tell us their name, their research interests, institutional affiliations, what projects they are working on, if they so choose. So that will be the sense in which we proceed here today. So on that note, it would be my distinct pleasure to welcome to present Feishayo Akindoyin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Feisha Akindoyin, and at the time that I registered for this conference, I was affiliated to Obafemi Awolowo University, but currently to the University of Calgary. And I will be presenting the paper titled Between Innocence and Violence, Rethinking Children's Vulnerability in Nigerian Civil War. So I'll be presenting the paper titled Between Innocence and Violence, Rethinking Children's Vulnerability in Nigerian Civil War. So I will start by introducing to you what vulnerability is. Okay. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, vulnerability means to wound. So, and I stated that vulnerable groups are physically, mentally, and socially disadvantaged persons who may be unable to meet their basic needs and may therefore require specific assistance. And I also said that the vulnerable people could be easily hurt, influenced, or attacked, wounded, and their weaknesses could be exploited. They are exposed to harsh conditions and treatments because of the environment and situation in which they found themselves. Then to children's vulnerability. The kind of vulnerability that I'm talking about presently is not the everyday vulnerability, but I'm talking about vulnerability in the context of war. So children in war situations could be vulnerable. They could be weak, they could be exploited, and they could also exploit others with their innocence. So what do I mean by innocence? Innocence means being guiltless, being clean, a sense of immaturity. And children, before war situation could possess any of these characteristics that I stated. They could be innocent, they could be clean, they could seem blameless, but in war situation, such conditions would change. You know, war situation could easily translate their childhood into adults in a short period of time because they needed to survive in war situations. Then I'll be moving on to the Nigerian Civil War, as I'm currently introducing. So the Nigerian Civil War was between 1967 and 1970. It was an unforgettable event in post-independent history of Nigeria. The war was also could be tagged Nigerian Biafran War or the Biafran War. The parties involved in the Civil War were the federal government of Nigeria and then the defunct Republic of Biafra. The federal troops fought to protect the integrity of Nigeria, the sovereignty of Nigeria. They wanted Nigeria to be one. While the Biafrans fought, on the side of the Biafrans, it was a nationalistic approach. They wanted to cease from being a part of Nigeria. But during this period, many people became exploited due to the activities of the military people that was heavily present during this period. They became so vulnerable. Women were vulnerable. Children were vulnerable. Men were vulnerable. Civilians were vulnerable because they could not be, differentiated easily from the military. And then the war occurred on their land, disrupting their livelihood and their lifestyles. So everybody, both the soldiers, the military men, those who were involved, everybody became vulnerable. Women, men, children. So for my studies, I won't be weighing the level of vulnerability. I won't be saying this group were more vulnerable. Should vulnerability be weighed? If you are vulnerable, you are vulnerable. So now going to the research questions. What are the roles of children in warfare? What were their roles? Many of them became spies. Many of them became cooks. Many of them, they had change of roles. Before, they were protected by their parents or loved ones or caregivers. But in war situation, the role changed. Many of them started protecting those who should have protected them. Many of them voluntarily joined the military just because they do not want to be burdens to their parents or protectors. Many of them voluntarily joined the military. Many of them became spies, and we could hear of the boy group, I will mention boy group. I'll mention the name during the course of this presentation. And in that group, many of them would pretend they will mask themselves, put on glasses, cover themselves up with weed, pretend as if they were trees in the bush, you know, so as to be able to spy on the federal government of Nigeria. And during that process, they will stay in the bush, you know, pretend and all those things. And during that process, if they were caught, they could easily, you know, remove their clothes. Because during my interview, I got that information. They could easily just remove their clothes and say, we are just trying to cover up for ourselves. You know, our parents are dead and we need help. We need shelter. And then on the ground of compassion, compassionate ground, they will be rescued. But that rescue, you know, on the part of the federal troops, they have done something good. But to the children were busy exploiting themselves because they know that people view them to be innocent. And so they were using that, their innocence, as a bait. So they will go into, you know, those people who took them as refugees, they will go into their midst, study how they move, study where and how they keep their ammunition, and then go back somehow to report what they have seen. So the next question is, what are the essence of children's innocence in war situation? In war situation, everybody lived to survive. Everybody struggled to survive. In war situation, there are no groups or classifications. Everybody are busy looking for a way to outlive that war or to escape from the war situation and experiences. So during that period, nobody seems to be responsible for others. Nobody seems to be responsible for the next person. Everybody looked for a way to, you know, shelter themselves and to protect themselves. In this situation, the children, just like everybody, looked for a way to shelter and to protect themselves. Some by joining the military, some by becoming spies or cooks for any of the camps, and different other lifestyles. How does war situation and experience accelerate childhood to adulthood? Please, the next slide. The next slide. And the next slide. The next slide. If you look at this picture, what are they? Are they children? They are children, but they are not just children. They are war collaterals. They are tools. You know, they are what made war look like. You know, international organizations, groups, individuals, they will come to their aid just to tell you that we are working to protect you. We are doing something for you. But this, what you are looking at, they are needed in nothing. They are needed to make the world look as if it is actually a war. What is war without seeing underfed children, malnourished children, children without shelter, children whose childhood was accelerated into becoming adults because they now need to protect for themselves. They have no one to depend on. Some of them, they forcefully have to join the military just to protect themselves and to protect their family, irrespective of their age and status. What you are seeing are not children. What you are seeing are, you know, instruments of warfare needed to make the war look at it easier. Next slide. And then, are these also children? The next question. Please, just slide 5. So, the argument of this study, children are not just vulnerable in violent situations, they are also agents of warfare. They are needed to look like this war situation. It could be for propaganda motives to show you that we are suffering. And likely, you may go into it. Look at what is happening. Children are families, they are malnourished, they are needed. When some children are vulnerable in war situations, not all children are vulnerable. Some children fell sick. No, they could not survive in that, you know. The food chain ordinary, they could not survive, they could not feed themselves. They become family, struggling, starved, no adequate support, and then we leave them. But there are some who took them care. They grew up. Before transition there from childhood to an adult, they grew up, they took their choice, and they joined the military. And in that military, they were able to, by themselves, exploit their own innocence by pretending, by becoming spies. You know? And after becoming spies, instead of being caught, they tell you, our parents have died in this. Our parents, we are suffering, please help us. But they are spies. And others also exploit them. So this company also argues that the innocence of children was not only exploited by warring parties, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and even children themselves, but it was a decisive tool in the construction of propaganda narratives. They were evident. They were evident. You needed to see that, to know that actually a group are actually going into bad, going into exile. Children who look like that and needed in office for the purpose of the and propaganda. So the methodology. I use the historical and anthropological approach. Primary sources, like the historical of the primary sources that I use, newspapers, visuals, oral and archival visuals, and then the secondary sources were relevant published books, journal articles, and other written materials on the internet. Anthropological applications that I did comparative analysis. People that what they see and that's from the case. So the conclusion. Number 11. So this paper concludes that some children are or could be vulnerable in war situations. Yes. Could be vulnerable in war situations, but not all children are vulnerable. Children's innocence does not translate to vulnerability, but rather it is an important tool in war. Children are major agents of war.
Well, thank you, Shayo. Please keep your questions if you do have them, comments, and of course, we will. I forgot to say the other time that we would keep all questions and comments and observations until the end of the entire presentations. So just keep them. Our folks online, please do post your questions. We will get them, and then we'll attend to them thereafter. Please, do we know if any other person other than Izzedine? So yeah, please, if you are online and you are a panelist, do confirm by sending a message. Thank you. So we will take the second presentation. Well, I will leave Izzedine to do a proper introduction of himself, but it suffices to say that I and Izzedine come a long way. We were both at the University of Manitoba in Canada. He's rounding up his PhD. Izzedine is originally from Palestine, and his presentation today, it's going to be, something from that context. And I look forward to that as well. So on that note, I'm going to yield the floor to Izzedine. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Liminal. Assalamu alaikum, everybody in attendance. Good morning to you all. I know it's the afternoon there, but it is 6:50 here in Canada, in Manitoba. So I appreciate the invitation, Dr. Liminal, and I'm looking forward to learning with you. Thank you to the previous speaker as well. Your presentation was very meaningful. I've learned a lot. I am going to share a story with you today. I'm a writer and I write stories to humanize the Palestinian cause. And I hope here you take a moment to reflect on what's been happening in Palestine for the past 8 months, since October 6th or October 7th. I'm originally from the West Bank of Palestine, from a city called Nablus. which is the heart of the West Bank. And I have family currently living there, and I have friends who live in Gaza as well, and I'm always and constantly worried about them. And in my role here in Canada, I'm a co-founder of an organization that tries to promote the human face of the Palestinian cause. The group that Admullah was part of it for a while as well. It is called Bridge Jisr, and it aims at, and I'll put the link here for you in the chat, it aims people together to talk about who they are and to share stories of their world. I'm a Palestinian, and to use language that was already here used this morning, I grown up in a place where my childhood was denied. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a childhood. In the Palestinian scenario, children are impacted greatly by the cause, by the conflict in Palestine. The occupation that we live under takes away every moment of every childhood that we have. Our schools have always been attacked. Our teachers have always been detained. Um, Tanks and F-16s are very uh, present in my memory this morning. My kufiyah that I'm wearing now, I remember going to school and struggling to wear it because of fear that I would be detained. My childhood friends, many of them ended up detained or, couldn't go to school because they had to get out and feed families of 12 or 13 or 14 people. So when we talk about children in conflict, we're talking about an entire sector of population that grow up too fast and they miss on their childhood. I also have a connection to my family there now, and I've written a story about my little cousin Khalid a few days ago, and Khalid, since October 7th, have aged. Khalid is only grade 4, but if you look at him today, you wouldn't know that he's a child. The stress of this conflict, the fear of this conflict, the worries of this conflict change the physical look of children, change the dynamics of how they are, how they operate in the world. They actually, in fact, stop being children. Their families are always constantly worrying, trying to put food on the table. And if you've been following what's happening in Gaza, you'd understand that the biggest population that has been targeted are the children and women. So with that, I don't have the right words to describe how my childhood escapes my fingertips every moment I think of Palestine. And I also remember my childhood trying to play in the neighborhood. We come from a communal setting in a small village, and every time an F-16 flew by, my mom would come and try to cover us. And lastly, because of the stresses, which I will highlight through my story, during my mother's pregnancy, I now live with a permanent damage in my kidney. Back home, we couldn't figure out what it was, but in Canada, we were able to diagnose this. And the doctors stated that it is due to high level of anxiety and PTSD that I have inherited some of this trauma. Now, if you come from a Palestinian background, we don't believe in trauma, and that's something that we need to work on. We don't understand how to diagnose it, and rightly so. I mean, if you are in a war zone, you don't have time to talk about your feelings. You don't have time to say I hurt. You don't have to say time to say I'm afraid. All you're trying to do is gather your children, try to gather your belongings, trying to gather your feelings and survive. So that I stepped outside of this conflict and live in Canada. I go back and forth all the time, and last year I was there running a course. But as soon as you walk in Palestine and you're stopped at the first checkpoint, the traumas and the pains arrive, and the tear gas sits here. And I can never explain and I can never articulate how tear gas arrives unannounced. So speak diagnose traumas. So with that, I'm not here bad for me. As a Palestinian, I don't acquire that and I don't want that. I want you to know that as a Palestinian, I'm resilient. As a Palestinian, I'm not leaving my land. And as a Palestinian, despite 80 years of trauma and war, I will continue to talk about my olive tree. So with that, To properly introduce myself to you, I'm Azzuddin Hawamdi. I am the son of the tree. I'm the son of the olive tree, and I'm the reflection of the harvest season. أنا بحكي عربي لغتي الأولى العربية. My first language, my mother tongue is the language Arabic. And English is a language that has colonized me and still does. And therefore, when I write my stories in English, I have a struggle and a dichotomy that I exist within, a dichotomy that I don't want and I don't know how to get out of. English has expressed to my grandmother, and today I find myself writing in it. A complex relationship. The story I'm going to share with you, a story that was born in Arabic and then translated into English. I didn't know what to title this story, so I titled it I Was Breastfed War. I'm going to share this on the screen. I don't know if you see it. Can everybody see it?
Yeah.
Excellent. I am going to just give me 1 second here. Try to make it big here. So this is a story that reflects the pain and the trauma and the occupation that combined my mother and I before I was even born. And I'll be very happy to hear from you afterwards. I named it I Was Breastfed War. While pregnant, my mother witnessed a full-scale invasion of her city. She watched as houses in the village were demolished and soldiers entered homes without warning or permission. I was born during the first Intifada in Palestine. It seethed in the background as I took in my first breath. As I opened my eyes to the world, my mother's tears reflected the clouds of tear gas filling the air outside the window as the cold breath struggled to break through the roaring of the tanks that filled the streets. A few months earlier, soldiers raided my family's home in the middle of the night. They shattered family pictures hanging on the wall. They broke the radio. They went into the kitchen and destroyed my grandmother's china plates. They took my mother's thobe dress out of the closet and stepped on it until it ripped. The soldiers' barks and growls reached me before I was born. As my mother balanced her fear for our lives with her hopes for my future, my life flickered in her womb like a candle in the storm. My mother did all she could to take care of me before I was born, but the Intifada was imprinted on my body like a summer storm scars an open field. My mother's pain and memories of war infused the tissues of my developing heart, becoming enmeshed in my soul like a prisoner trapped in a cell. She says that when our city was invaded and the Intifada took over the streets, her body could no longer contain her hopes and fears and me. She said she could feel the strain of war flowing through her veins as she envisioned the flames of wildfire materializing from the lines in the palms of her hands. I was born prematurely. As a young boy, I watched school children chanting to end the occupation as they marched through swarm after swarm of stinging rubber bullets. I listened as my mother cried and agonized about passing on the anxiety and pain of the Intifada. I felt her heart beat against my back as she laid next to me when I slept while she softly fretted over whether she had lost her humanity. I realize now that as I grew, so did the grip of the barbed wire on what should have been my childhood. The story on my desk behind me, there's about 50 pages left, but I have to convince myself to put them in English. This story talks about my mother, talks about my neighborhood. In the Palestinian context, I don't know how much time we have, Dr. Admola, but Am I good for time? I don't want to go over time.
Just another 3 minutes more.
Okay. So in the Palestinian culture, we have names for things, and one of the for rubber bullets, the Palestinians give them nicknames because we hear them all the time. The checkpoints, we also have nicknames for them. And the checkpoints, if you ever seen a checkpoint or been stopped at a checkpoint, the Israelis try to take away your humanity at the checkpoint. But the Palestinians define that. They stand there with everything they've got. We stand there with our chests and hearts and skin. We stand there with saffron. We stand there with the sunbird. We try to state and restate our presence on our land. You're looking at fourth generation occupied. That's me. You hear about the Palestinian cause out there on the news. You hear about it on social media. Now you have a face. This face is the Palestinian cause. This face is the trauma of 80 years. Every now and then, here in Canada even, we face racism and discrimination because of who we are. And Admal and I talk about this all the time. Recently, I was given a lecture and I started by speaking in Arabic. And someone filed a complaint that Arabic made them feel threatened. Being a